All right, today we're going to dig into a tool called SIMPORT, and it's really interesting because it basically throws a wrench into one of the biggest and maybe most dangerous assumptions in modern finance. We're going to see how it tries to build portfolios for the world as it actually is, not how it looks in a textbook. So let's start with a question that probably keeps a lot of investors up at night. You build this portfolio, it looks great on paper, everything checks out, but then a real crisis hits and the whole thing just crumbles. Well, the reason often comes down to a huge flaw in how we're taught to think about the market. And this picture says it all. Over on the left, you've got the textbook market. See how neat and tidy that bell curve is? In that world, massive crashes are basically statistical impossibilities. But on the right, that's reality, a market with what we call fat tails. That messy, unpredictable orange zone, that's crash risk. That's where the real danger lives, and it's what most traditional models just dangerously ignore. So how do we actually get ready for the real world, fat tails and all? Well, SIMPORT's answer starts with building a much smarter forecast. Instead of just looking backward, it builds a forward-looking picture from three totally different angles. Let's break them down. First up, it unleashes the AI. It uses these hybrid machine learning models to predict key economic stuff, like currency shifts and foreign investment over the next couple of weeks. This gives it a hard, quantitative, data-driven peek into what might be coming. But hey, numbers are only part of the story, right? So for the second layer, it uses natural language processing to literally read the news and score the sentiment. It's measuring the market's mood. Is the chatter getting optimistic, or is fear starting to creep into the headlines? And finally, it brings in the classics from the finance textbooks. It looks at each asset's exposure to those tried-and-true risk factors, things like company size, value, profitability. It's basically mapping out each asset's fundamental financial DNA. Okay, so this is where it all comes together. This is the secret sauce. When you combine those three layers, the AI forecast, the news sentiment, and that financial DNA, SIMPORT creates something it calls enhanced semantic bias. Basically, it's the platform's very own forward-looking 14-day expected return. It's not just a guess, it's a super intelligent, multifaceted projection of the future. But look, a smart forecast is awesome, but it's only half the battle. To make good decisions, you have to pair that forecast with a crystal clear picture of risk. And let's be honest, the market is incredibly noisy. So how does SIMPORT cut through all of that static? Well, first, SIMPORT gets that risk isn't some static number you calculate once. No, it's a living, breathing thing. So it uses a dynamic model to see how volatility is shifting in real time. It's basically watching to see if the risk temperature is heating up or cooling down for every single asset. But even then, there's still a ton of static. And this is where a really fascinating idea comes in: random matrix theory. The best way to think about this is like putting a pair of noise-canceling headphones on the market data. Its only job is to separate the real, meaningful risk signals from all the random statistical noise. So the key takeaway here is this: random matrix theory filters the raw data, cleaning it up to give the system a much purer, more reliable map of how assets are truly connected. This clean risk input is what makes the final portfolio so much stronger. Okay, so now we have a smart view of future returns and a really clean picture of risk. With those two things, SIMPORT can finally start building portfolios. And it gives you three distinct strategies, each one tailored for a different kind of investor goal. First up is maximize Sharpe. You can think of this as the swing for the fences strategy. It's all about pure performance, trying to squeeze out the absolute best return for every unit of risk you take on. This usually means you end up with a more concentrated portfolio, one that's really betting big on the assets with the highest potential. The second option is the polar opposite. Minimize tail risk is all about defense. Its one and only job is to protect your money when a nasty market crash hits. This creates a deeply defensive portfolio, one that's focused on assets that tend to hold up when everything else is going down in flames. How does it do it? Well, it uses this really powerful metric called conditional value at risk, or CVAR. So instead of just asking, what's the most I could lose, it asks a smarter question. Okay, if things get really bad, what will my average loss be? It zeroes in on protecting you from the absolute worst 5% of outcomes. It's a direct shield against those fat tails we talked about.
And finally, you've got the third option, the balanced mix. You can think of this as the Goldilocks strategy. It's trying to find that just right spot, intelligently balancing the search for returns with that crucial protection against disaster. What you get is a really robust, well-diversified portfolio that's built to handle whatever the market throws at it.
But SIMPORT goes even deeper than that. It has these advanced features that are like sentinels, standing guard against those catastrophic, system-wide meltdowns. And this is where it gets really, really cool. First, it actively hunts for contagion risk. The system finds what it calls the giant vulnerable cluster, basically a group of high-risk assets that are all moving together, dangerously linked. If one falls, it could start a domino effect. So SIMPORT automatically penalizes putting too much money into these assets, effectively breaking the chain of contagion before it can start. Second, it watches out for herding risk. The model actually measures the market's magnetization. That's just a fancy way of saying it detects when everyone is stampeding in the same direction, creating a dangerous bubble. When it spots this herd behavior, SIMPORT automatically pushes the portfolio to be a little more contrarian to avoid getting trampled when the herd inevitably turns. So after all of this high-level math and these really advanced models, what do you, the user, actually get? How does all this complexity turn into a simple, actionable plan? You get a super clean, simple report that looks something like this. It tells you exactly which assets to own, the optimal percentage for each one, what their expected return is, and it even suggests specific hedges you could use to protect your positions. All that complexity gets boiled down into a clear set of instructions. And it gives you one key number to anchor on, the worst-case CVAR. This is probably the single most important risk metric here. It tells you in plain English what your average loss is expected to be in the worst 5% of scenarios, even if the model itself is a little uncertain. It's the ultimate stress test for your portfolio's resilience. And that really brings us to the final critical question. Tools like SIMPORT exist because they get a simple truth. The market isn't a neat, predictable place. It's a messy, real-world system with sudden crashes, herd behavior, and a whole lot of noise. So the question you've got to ask yourself is this: is my portfolio built for that reality, or is it built for a fantasy world that only exists in textbooks?